conversation between a customer and a booking officer at a theatre. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4 on page 2. You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Hello, Theatre Royal Plymouth?
Oh, hello. I'd like to make a booking, please.
Yes. What is it you want to see?
The Imposter.
Right.
The man wants to see The Imposter, so Imposter has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Hello, Theatre Royal Plymouth?
Oh, hello. I'd like to make a booking, please.
Yes. What is it you want to see?
The Imposter.
Right. And which day did you want to come?
Friday the 25th.
Just a moment and I'll check availability on the computer. Oh, sorry, we're fully booked for that performance.
Oh, dear. What about the following day, then?
The 26th? Yes, that's okay. We've got 2 performances on that day, one at 3:30 and one at 7. Which would you prefer?
Oh, the later one, please.
Mm-hmm. How many people?
Well, there are 4 of us.
Are there any concessions? Any children?
Oh, I'm not sure. My daughters are 15 and 12. Do they get concessions?
Only the 12-year-old, I'm afraid. So that's 1 child and 3 adults. Any idea where you'd like to sit? Stalls or circle?
Tickets
for the stalls are a bit more expensive. £12 for adults and £8.50 for children. The circle costs £10.50 and £6.50.
Do you get a good view from the circle?
Oh, yes. And in fact, we've got some seats left at the front, if you'd like those.
Right. We'll go for those, then.
Right, that's seats A21 to 24, then. They're very good seats.
That sounds fine.
So let's see, that comes to £38 altogether for the tickets. How do you want to collect them? Shall I put them in the post? They'd be sent today by first-class mail, and there'd be an additional charge of £1 to cover postage and administration. Or do you want to get them from the box office yourself?
Oh, yes. Could you send them, please?
No problem. That'll be £39 altogether.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10 on page 2. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Could I just take your card details? What kind of card is it? Visa? Switch?
MasterCard.
OK. And the number?
It's 3290 5876 4401 2899.
2899. OK. And the name on the card, please?
It's Mr. J. Whitton. WHITTON.
N for never or M for mother?
N for never.
Thank you. And now I've nearly finished, but I just need your address and postcode.
Yes, it's 42 South Street.
OK. Is that Plymouth?
London.
And the postcode?
It's SW2 5GE.
That's fine then. The ticket should be with you tomorrow. Is there anything else I can do for you?
Yes, I was wondering if I could get regular information about what's on.
Certainly. I can just add your name to our mailing list. Would that be okay?
That would be very good. Yes, please. Oh, and there is something else, sorry. One of our group is hard of hearing, and I've heard that you can supply special headphones.
That's right. As long as you tell us in advance, we can always do that. I'll book those for you now, and you can just collect them from the box office before the show.
Thanks very much for your help.
No problem. Thank you for calling.
Thank you. Bye.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 2. 2. Section 2. You hear a club leader giving information to a group of young people who are planning to do a 2-week holiday course at the Tamerton Centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen and answer questions 11 to 15.
Hello, everyone. I've been asked to talk to you this afternoon about next month's trip to Tamerton Study Center for the 2-week course. Now, some of the things I'm going to say you may have already heard or read about, but I think it's important to emphasize a few key points. First of all, it's worth reminding you why Tamerton was set up in the first place, in the late 1960s. That was really before all the concern with preserving the environment, which everyone talks about these days. The idea was simply to get people out of the cities and into the country, and to find out that just being outdoors can be very rewarding. This is not going to be a holiday in the usual sense. It's called an adventure course because you'll really be stretched to your limits, but that in itself can be a positive thing. The group I took last year, for example, said that although they actually felt pretty weak and exhausted all the time, it really made them learn a lot about themselves and increased their confidence. And in the end, that's the most important thing. Now, all of you knew about policies at Tamerton before you signed up for it, so you know that in many ways it's quite old-fashioned. You don't have a lot of choice in what you do. But something which I think makes the place so special is that you get to try so many different things every day. For instance, one day you'll do climbing, and the next you'll be surveying rock pools. It's not intended that you become an expert in any of them. It's more like a taster, which you can follow up if you want. And there isn't a lot of free time. Organized activities and talks, etc., go on until 9 p.m., and lights go out at 11 p.m. There are table tennis tables with all the equipment, and board games, though I have to say the pieces often go missing, so it's a good idea to take your own. There's a DVD player with a good selection of films suitable for this age group, so don't take yours. Bedtime at 11 p.m. is strictly enforced, and there's a good reason for this. You're all under 18, and we organizers need to know that all group members are accounted for in the house as we close for the night. And of course, you'll be so exhausted anyway that you'll be too sleepy to want to cause any trouble.
Now you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now, what should you pack? The information sheet tells you a lot about what clothing to bring. But what about other things? Well, Tamerton House has its own small shop, but anything there is several miles away, so you won't have many opportunities for buying supplies. So in this last part of my talk, I'm going to explain what objects you should take with you to the center, what you can take if you want, and also, very importantly, what you cannot take. Several of you came up to me before this talk and asked whether you can take things like kettles or hair dryers. The answer is there are plenty of these electrical appliances available in the center, and they are of the proper voltage and are checked regularly. Yours may not be, so the rules at Tamerton say you can't bring them into the center because it's considered a fire risk. Remember, it's a very old house. Now another question was about cell phones. Although you definitely can't have them on during inside talks, you equally definitely need them when you're out on exercises. So they're a must, I'm afraid. Anybody who wishes to talk to me about borrowing a phone for the fortnight, please see me after this talk. Now, the weather's heating up at the moment, and you'll be outdoors a great deal. If you wear proper clothing, especially a hat, sun cream is optional. Also, they sell high-factor cream in the shop, so you don't have to take any of your own unless there's a special kind you use. Now, there's a special note about things like deodorants, which come in aerosol cans. I need to tell you that these are banned in the center because apparently they have the habit of setting off the fire alarms. If you want to take an aerosol can, you'll actually be at risk of being told to leave. And finally, people have been asking about whether they need to take towels. Well, the center does provide 1 towel per guest, which you're required to wash yourself. If you're happy with that, then don't bring another. If not, take one of your own. Just remember how much outdoor exercise you'll be doing and how dirty and wet you'll be getting.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now listen to the rest of the conversation and answer questions 26 to 30.
Look, we ought to start working out what to do next for our project.
Yes, enough moaning.
OK, the main thing is to allocate the various tasks between us, isn't it?
Yes, well, we're going to need the questionnaire before we can do much else, aren't we? Do you want to handle that?
I'd assumed we'd do it together.
Well, you have more experience than me. Maybe you could think up the main questions, you know, a first version of the whole thing, and then I could read it through.
And make suggestions? Well, OK. My experience on projects has all been with closed groups. I don't really know how you go about selecting subjects from larger populations.
Actually, it's quite straightforward. You use tables of randomised numbers.
Could you show me?
Yeah, I'll take you through the process. That way you'll learn and I'll feel surer for having someone else there. Now that brings us to the interviews themselves.
Right. Would you like to do them? Or are there too many?
Well, your typing's pretty fast, isn't it? So if you agree to handle the transcribing afterwards, I'm prepared to do the face-to-face stage. Does that sound fair?
It does to me. But tell me if you find it takes longer than you thought.
And vice versa. And when we get the results all together, they'll need to be run through statistics programs, won't they? That's where I always feel a bit unsure about which tests are the correct ones to choose.
Same here. But we can get advice from the lecturers about that. Shall we do all that as a joint effort?
I think it'd make us feel more secure about what we were doing.
Yes, it would be terrible to get that wrong after all the hard work leading up to it.
And then we've got to present the whole thing to the group. Will you feel up to doing that?
I think we should do a joint presentation. It's all both our work, after all.
I guess you're right. But would you mind getting the slides and so on ready? I find that takes me ages and still doesn't look any good.
Whereas I quite enjoy that kind of thing. OK. Now, we need to think about a few...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 4. Section 4. You will hear a writer giving a talk about the different kinds of writing that the audience might want to try doing. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 31 to 40.
So, I'm now going to say a few words about the various different kinds of writing you may want to consider. Each has its own challenges and rewards, and it's really a question of seeing what suits you best. There are no rights and wrongs here. Let's start by considering the short story. Remember that a short story isn't just a very concise novel. There are 3 basic styles: the story itself, the slice of life section, and the surprise type, and all of them are equally valid as treatments of the genre. When producing a short story, you don't have time for a slow build-up of interest, so you need to get in there straight away and begin with a crisis. Then there's non-fiction, which can sell very well, with biographies in particular frequently hitting the bestseller lists. It's important, however, to be sure your chosen topic is genuinely interesting to people, and you know enough about it to do it justice. So when you're submitting your idea to a publisher, it's worthwhile to give them details of specialist knowledge you have. What about articles? Now, this is a very wide area, of course, going from the very learned and obscure to the populist gossip type. Articles based on giving advice are a proven area, and to give them a sufficient focus, you should produce your article for a definite market. That will help to define your purpose. Turning to something different, there's the question of poetry. It's often hard to define what poetry is exactly. Maybe it's easier to say what it isn't. But it should be subtle, so the message of a poem oughtn't to be overly obvious. True poems let the ideas sit there for the reader to ponder. What they must do is sound good, like singing. So I recommend reading what you write aloud to yourself to check the melody. Well, then there's plays, which are basically novels, but told only through conversation. A playwright includes minimal instructions for actions, but not for every small action the actors will perform. Things such as moves towards sofa and so on are for the director to come up with. If you're thinking of trying your hand at a play, a good starting point would be to educate yourself a little in the art of acting, so that you know what the people who deliver your work can and can't do with it. What next? There's radio, of course. Radio uses an enormous range of material, and the BBC Writing for Radio Handbook contains information about all of this. To begin with, I suggest regional stations for sending your stuff to. The competition for national radio is extremely high. OK, another interesting area is children's literature. Now, very few, if any, children's books are published without pictures, but this doesn't mean that you, as writer, have to draw them. That's for the illustrator. What you do need to do is be clear who you want to write for. So fix on one age group, and then aim your stories at that. Right, I've saved what I consider to be the best and the hardest till last, the novel. Very long and very difficult to do well, but certainly not impossible, as any bookshop shelves will confirm. One of the first things to decide is from what point of view you will tell your story. A popular choice is the first person, and this technique certainly gives a sense of immediacy for the reader, while many new writers find it easier to project themselves into their main character if they can write in his or her name. But that assumes, of course, that the main character is somehow like the writer, which may or may not be the case. Meanwhile, if your book is all narrated by I, you can only put into your story things which are experienced by that character, which may prove to be rather restricting. Now, there are all sorts of pitfalls for the novelist, and many of them relate to the issue of providing a balanced narrative. Every time you introduce a character into the story, you have decisions to make. Of course, you want to populate your landscape with a variety of people to maintain interest, but don't feel you have to decorate every one of them in elaborate detail. The same goes for irony. All too often, an inexperienced writer will create a strong ironic situation and then spoil it by spelling out what they mean by it, as if readers were too stupid to understand. A few contrasting details should serve to make the point clear. A big challenge for new novelists is dialogue. What is the relationship between conversation as people really speak and as it is in novels? Well, it depends. If you recorded actual conversations and copied them straight into your narrative, readers would get confused and bored, all those unfinished sentences going nowhere. On the other hand, you don't want to write out page-long utterances by characters, as these will seem unrealistic to an extreme, but you can insert minor descriptions and actions to vary the pace and add interest. Well, I hope what I'm saying is encouraging and not too off-putting about the various difficulties. Are there any questions at this point?
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
One.